Welcome to another episode of the ASEF podcast. So far we have explored many different fields: physics, computer science, biochemistry, robotics, and many others. And today we will be talking with two ASEF collaborators about chemistry. With us are Dr. Vita Godec, who is a managing director at Lenis farmacevtika in Slovenia, and Professor Sarlah, who is a professor at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign in the USA, and I, Tanja Janko, a ASEF fellow from 2019. I am a chemist and I will be your host on today's podcast. So let's start with today's conversation. I would ask you to briefly introduce yourselves and tell us, how did you make a decision to specialize in organic chemistry?
So I guess, I can start. Thank you, Tanja, and to ASEF for a kind invitation. It's really a great pleasure to be here. I end up in organic chemistry simply because I think I had like really amazing, already a teacher in my primary school who got me really excited for chemistry. And then also amazing teachers in high schools where I realized that organic synthesis is kind of the area I wanted to proceed, and then really was kind of focusing on this more and more during my undergraduate education, and ultimately really ending up doing a job which I always at least since almost like teenager age, I kind of consider to be my dream job, right? Like following my passion, and really working towards the goals, right? And really being fortunate by all the people that supported me. I think, as also Vita will probably say, right? It's like we've been very privileged to have awesome mentors, teachers, parents also at the end of the day, and friends who really supported us to be where we are today.
Yeah, I would join David's opinion that it starts really in elementary school, where you first meet these subjects, and chemistry was really interesting to me. I knew the periodic table before I even started the 7th grade, because you had to buy it, in August before starting school, and it was really interesting, this double-sided periodic table with the pictures of the elements on the other side. When organic chemistry, probably in secondary school, in gymnasia, because there we really met it for the first time, I think, in detail. And interestingly, I think high school is the first time David's and mine paths crossed, actually. I brought an exhibit which our listeners won't be able to see, but David, we received the Golden Pregal Award in the same year, 2001, when you were a third year and I was a second year in high school. And we probably physically met on that award ceremony in the pedagogical faculty in Ljubljana. But we didn't, of course, know each other as we do now. I also kind of followed David's steps to the Faculty of Chemistry and Chemical Technology in Ljubljana. But the difference is I studied biochemistry because I was always interested in chemistry happening in live beings. Living organisms. Although then in 4th year of university, I also specialized in organic chemistry because I had the option to choose that. And I did, and there our paths really met for the second time because we were doing our undergraduate degree lab work at the same time in the same floor, second floor, Department of Organic Chemistry.
It's a small world, right? It's amazing. I was also thinking just earlier today, when is the first time we actually met? And it was, we were both doing undergraduate research at the same, cátedra for organic chemistry, right? You were in the organic area at that point, right? Right. And those were really fun times.
And I would add to what David said earlier, how important it is to have professors all along this way that encourage you, that if you're interested, give you extra literature to read, extra information, really take their time. That's essential for people to go and study natural science.
Perfect. And you two already spoke a little bit about your early careers, or let's say rather beginnings of your careers. So would you mind walking us through your path? So you said that you both shared an experience at University of Ljubljana. You both obtained a PhD in organic chemistry there, and then you followed up with postdoctoral work for Professor Sarlah that was at ETH in Switzerland, and for you, Dr. Godec, that was at the University of Warwick in the UK. So how did your experiences during this period shape your future career trajectories? So for Professor Sarlah, you went on and pursued academic path, and Dr. Godec, you transitioned into industry.
Yeah, so when I was undergraduate in University of Ljubljana, I had an opportunity to actually do kind of like a research visiting experience in the United States at Scripps Research Institute, and I went to Columbia University, where I really got exposed to a field called total synthesis, right? And that I was really fascinated. This is an area of research that is not present in really present greatly in Europe, but definitely is not present in Slovenia. And therefore, I decided to actually continue my postgraduate studies. I did my doctorate at Scripps Research Institute in La Jolla, and there I really kind of honed my skills, learned how to do complex molecule synthesis, learn how to become a proficient synthetic chemist, and after completing my PhD, I decided to kind of learn another area of organic synthesis, which is called like asymmetric catalysis, which kind of took me on the journey to Switzerland, to ETH Zürich with Professor Carrera, where I spent around 3 years and really learning the kind of basics of catalysis, organometallic chemistry, asymmetric catalysis, and that ultimately kind of shaped my I would say early career path. I always wanted to kind of teach, do research in academic settings. We always think this is a little bit associated with having your own freedom in a way, right? Professionally speaking. And I think I was fortunate enough that I felt that I'm maybe in a good position, that I'm competitive enough. I really didn't know until the end whether I should do this, because it's a bit more let's say competitive path. There are only like few positions available for this type of careers, but I felt that maybe I was fortunate enough that I had good results, and I apply, and the rest is history.
Yeah, I maybe took a bit of a different path. And again, I'll go back to our times together in the lab. If you remember, at one point, you drew a pyramid or a triangle on a blackboard in the lab. And you said, Vita, you're never going to be great organic chemist, because for that, you have to have focus. And you drew a pyramid. I said, if you want to be great at one thing, then you have to do that one thing amazing. Yeah. And I'm always interested in many things. I have many interests besides the chemistry, music. I play the saxophone, God knows what else. And I didn't get it at that point, but today I understand that you're a specialist and I'm a generalist. And that's how my path actually continued from my undergrad studies on. So I stayed at that University of Ljubljana and I did my PhD studies there, but there's a difference. So my undergrad was biochemistry. My fourth year undergrad specialization was bioorganic or organic chemistry. And my PhD, yes, was in, let's say, organic chemistry, but with a heavy emphasis on, let's say, medicinal chemistry. I collaborated with the Faculty of Pharmacy, where we tested in vitro some of the products we synthesized. So I also did some of the testing on the enzymes. And I fell into this world of enzymes so hard, and with, again, a research experience in the UK in the lab of Professor Roper at University of Warwick, which I had, I think, during the second year of my PhD studies. We got along so well that after my PhD, I wanted to do a postdoc there. And I found that opportunity through, what was it? It was the UNESCO L'Oréal scholarship for women in science, yeah. And I got the funds to go to the UK, and I had an amazing time there. I think the best professional development in terms of the research I did. And the research was structural biology, so it was another field I went in. So I'm not an expert in any of them, but I know all of them quite well, I would say. And yeah, to continue, but I think this is going to be one of the next questions. I got in touch with industry at that point during my postdoc. I did some project management of some outsourced projects for industry, and that's what pulled me eventually out of academia.
Great. So just staying with you, Dr. Godec. So at this time, you are managing director at Lenis Farmacevtika in Slovenia. Would you mind telling us a bit more about your role and the company itself?
Sure. I joined Lenis in 2015. After I came back to Slovenia, I first worked for a year in Lek, which is a Sandoz company under Novartis at that point. They're splitting now, but I worked in Menges in biopharmaceutical R&D. But then I got the opportunity to do an MBA also through a sort of scholarship I got by accident, actually. And with all this industrial experience I got in the UK, I thought this fast-paced world of industry that wants results fast and is not dependent on writing some papers is something that attracted me more than, in the end, academic career, which I always thought would be my first choice and the only choice I envisioned for myself. But what our company does, so I joined the company as a project manager, and I walked the whole path from project manager to business development manager to director of operations, and eventually, since last year in March, I'm a managing director of the whole company. There are around 50 people working in 8 countries of the region, all the way from Slovenia down to Albania, and we distribute pharmaceutical products from other big companies, big pharma companies that are not present with their own affiliates in our region. But this doesn't mean we're purely a wholesaler. We do all sorts of services for them, from regulatory affairs, medical promotion, marketing promotion, pharmacovigilance, so on and so forth. So like a full service one-stop shop for pharma companies wanting to enter, let's say, Central and Eastern Europe.
So when you transitioned from your initial academic career to the industry, what were some of the biggest challenges or maybe surprises that you encountered along the way?
The world of industry is quite different. I think David would agree, and I'm sure you've come into this world at some point in your career also. It's, I would say, much more fast-paced, much more regulated on the other side as well, especially pharma industry. They say pharma industry is as regulated as the, airplanes, so the companies that make sure that we fly safely. And in a way, it makes a really high barrier for entry into this arena. But once you're in, once you have a really good team, you can achieve amazing results here. And we have a really high educated staff here. They're all either pharmacists, biologists, biochemists. Of course, for finance, we have economists and so on. Unfortunately, we don't do R&D, but we do distribute both innovative and generic products, both licensed and unlicensed medicines, both like early access so medicines that are not available yet in our countries, and we try to do early access for patients that really need them and depend on them for their health and for their life, basically, to life cycle management of all but cost-effective drugs. So I would really say I'm at the very other end of the research spectrum, seeing how this research that's happening in the big pharma companies reaches the end markets. Yeah.
You also mentioned that you finished an MBA degree soon after you entered the industry. Would you say that this additional education helped to enhance your professional career?
Yes, absolutely. As I said, I fell into that MBA by accident. My husband saw an advert that there's a competition to receive some sort of scholarship for that, and I always said I should know, a bit more about business, because when you're in these academic tracks, just trying to become a professor or a PI somewhere, you don't really know what's happening outside. You're not aware that there are other jobs for people who studied chemistry, right? So at the end of my first postdoc, with another colleague I lived with in the UK, we were both kind of thinking, should we do another postdoc? Should we really go on that path, or are there other options? So in the end, she, for example, ended up being a postdoc advisor at the Imperial College in London. So she now oversees 2,000 natural sciences postdocs in Imperial College. And I went completely different route, yeah. But without that MBA, it was like a crash course in business, to be honest. I was never, up until that point, interested in business at all. Even that case we had to solve to get the scholarship, which was then 50% of the registration fees to attend this, let's say, master's here in Slovenia. I didn't know what the numbers in brackets meant in financial terms. I didn't know that meant negative numbers, right? For me, mathematically, it should be minus something, not 300 in brackets. I don't know what 300 in brackets means, right? So I was really illiterate in economy, but also I would say in people skills and HR and leadership, because nobody really teaches us that, right? We're taught to calculate things, to get to one definitive answer that is right, to a mass that is right to the second decimal or whatever, but how to handle an employee that's crying in the corner because he got or she got harsh email from their line manager. Nobody teaches you how to do that. So I was lucky to attend this MBA in Bled, which is a really special school in international, I would say, area, because they focus a lot on these soft skills, not only on the economics, the numbers. And it's quite important when you're leading a company. You have to take care of your team. Or when you're leading a lab, David, you will know. It's not just the grams and the APIs and the spatulas and the pipettes, but it's also people and their feelings and their wishes, and all that has to be taken into account.
Yeah, the soft skills are becoming so important, right? Yeah.
Dr. Godec, even though you said that the company that you're currently working for is not doing any R&D, what would you say that are biggest differences when it comes to academic and industry research and the settings, and what kind of research questions are prioritized and pursued?
So the research questions we are faced with are predominantly questions from HCP. So these are healthcare professionals, are medical, public affairs, and marketing people visit on the field that inquire about the developments in treatment of certain diseases. So we have to carefully follow all the clinical studies. And clinical studies, again, is something we were not taught about in our undergrad, at least, studies, right? All the research from that. So again, we are reading papers for sure, thankfully not writing them anymore, and trying to communicate those developments in the research to the doctors and in the PA setting, so in public affairs setting, also to the NGOs and to the patients, right? Because let's say our mission or vision is to enable equitable access to modern medicines, even for this region. You would think we're in Europe. We get all the medicines that the West gets. We don't, especially if you're a non-EU country. Nobody wants to distribute drugs in Kosovo, in North Macedonia, because they are two small markets. They are regulatory-wise very complicated to enter. They're markets with very low prices. So, you know, we fight to get medicines also to these places, and these are not like Africa and third world countries, right? These are our neighboring countries. Again, the research we don't do, but we read about it and we try to disseminate that information amongst the let's say stakeholders in our area, so the everybody knows what's available and helps us get it there.
And how do you see pharmaceutical industry evolving in Slovenia over the next few years?
We have really great scientists and companies in Slovenia. Unfortunately, they're generic companies, which was always a pain for me. Krka is really big and successful. Lek is big and successful. It was under Novartis. Now they're kind of splitting Novartis, Sandoz. This is going to be a big change in the following year, and it has begun already. What I liked in Mengash when I was there for a year in Lek is that they're also doing biopharmaceuticals, which Krka doesn't. They stay with small molecules, so they're really strong also, predominantly in small molecule synthesis. Whilst here in Lek, I would say they are looking towards creating biosimilars, which is going to be the big new wave when the big antibodies and Humiras of the world, the patent cliff falls. I think we're going to be right there on the line. So in terms of employment, if you study biochemistry, chemistry, pharmacy, and the related fields here in Slovenia, you have very good chances to be employed in industry. Although if you want to work, for an innovative company, you will have to go out of Slovenia.
So now turning a bit to Professor Sarlah, you are more in academia, and your group research focuses more in total synthesis, as far as I understand. Would you mind explaining us what this actually entails?
Yeah, so I'm exactly on the completely opposite end than Vita, right? I mean, she's already dealing with the end products that went all the testings and everything, and my research is more basic. I mean, it's completely basic research. And total synthesis is a unique field in organic chemistry that deals with synthetic recreation of natural products. So what are natural products? Natural products are compounds that are produced by nature, right? Those are usually small molecules. They could be also large polymers, of course, such as proteins or DNA, right? But particularly total synthesis of small molecules is I can give you an example, right, of kind of a project we're working on. Let's say you have, you have a bunch of scientists who go to different parts of the world, and they, let's say, they scuba dive sponges around islands of Fiji. I mean, this has to be a really great job, obviously, right? But actually that exists, right? Or they go to different rainforests and they collect different specimens like plants, flowers, insects, and stuff like that. Then they bring these usually organisms or plant materials to their labs, and they extract them, and they look what kind of molecules are present inside there. And we call these molecules natural products because they're obtained from nature. The problem is that quite often these molecules are actually really potent, right? They are bioactive. They can, kill certain bacteria. They're potent antibiotics. They will inhibit growth of cancer cells. So they're potent anti-cancer agents. But we cannot really develop and use them as a drug because you would have to go and get all the sponges from the ocean floor, which you cannot really get, right? You're gonna harvest like some really exotic organisms and plants, and of course you would destroy biodiversity, or likely you wouldn't even have enough material to produce enough to make it a drug. And this is where total synthesis comes in, because our job is to remake the same molecules using completely, synthetic approaches. So we start with feedstock chemicals, so chemicals that we get mainly from petrochemical industry. So they come from oil, crude oil, right? And then we find a way, we chemically engineer them, in a way, synthetically engineer them with several different transformations to arrive at the compounds that at the end are identical to the compounds you get from nature, right? And that would be kind of a total synthesis in a nutshell, right? Really a chemist way of recreating compounds that we can find in nature.
And following up that question, so you very nicely explained that you identify a compound, and then you kind of have to do a retrosynthetic analysis of that compound, because you kind of have to deconstruct the compound so you can then construct it in a chemical way. Can you tell us a little bit more about retrosynthetic analysis, and how significant is it in organic chemistry research?
Yeah, so retrosynthesis means that we design the compound. It's going backwards, right? It would be imagine if you have a car and you have to do a retrosynthesis on a car, you're going to come to the tires, to the doors, you're going to come to different components. But in synthesis, that's really kind of important, because retrosynthesis determines kind of the synthetic efficiency, also the feasibility often, right? Because if we go back to analogy to the car, right, it's important what order you put parts together, right? At the end, you have to arrive at the car, right? But you can arrive at the car by maybe first installing, frame, tires on the frame, then the doors. And the way how you do this, it actually can simplify drastically the way how you can build things. And retrosynthesis is thinking about how to make the molecules ultimately, with the ultimate goal to kind of come, it's very imaginative. It's, I guess we're going to talk this a bit later. It's becoming a bit more driven by data and machine, chemoinformatics, machine learning. But it's still a very imaginative process, because every synthetic chemist will see how to make a molecule very differently. And that's why, the retrosynthesis is often, we call it like art, art in science, because, I can show a structure to Vita and she will draw it, approach how she would make this compound completely different than me. But yet we can both arrive with our pathways to that compound, to the same compound at the end. We just differently how we can arrive there. Often people call this like, compare this with, climbing the mountain. Imagine you have to come to the top of the mountain, but you can have a variety of different directions. How do you get, right? Or pathways, how you can come to the top. And it's at the end, it's very individual, but ultimately it's kind of a guiding tool to simplify the way how we can make molecules.
So before, you mentioned that when you were studying, there wasn't really a total synthesis professor at the University of Ljubljana. At this point in time, I am not sure if they are working on total synthesis or not. I have also left the university a couple of years ago, and also I was not specializing in organic chemistry. But what do you believe that are the key areas that need to be developed or strengthened at the University of Ljubljana at chemistry faculty that we would felicitate further advancements in research?
the issue is that the chemistry as a science is so huge that it's impossible that every department can cover all the areas, right? And often you see this in not just in organic chemistry but in in chemistry field as a general, that every department will have its own specialties, right? And so in that regard, I wouldn't say that that there's something that is missing. For example, University of Ljubljana, I think it's an awesome place. It obviously produces really good students, as proven here, right, Vita, right? And we just we are a bit, as a country, we're a bit too small to really cover the whole discipline, right? On the other hand, right, in Ljubljana we have like the chemistry of fluorine, right, as a contrast, for example, which you can find only in like 10 or 11 places in the whole planet, right? So it's what I'm trying to say, like some just because we don't have some specialty, we're lacking some specialty, doesn't mean that that could be seen as a deficiency. That's kind of a natural way how it goes, right? I think I personally think education in Slovenia is like really superb, right? Things that of course we are quite small, things that we could, I think, reinforce ourselves is more in the research wise, but it's hard to expect for a country of 2 million to have exceptionally competitive research program in all areas, right? So for me that's kind of like normal, and I think students who maybe have the passion to do something that maybe they cannot find in Slovenia, I know they have awesome prospects, right? Through the I've been involved in ASEF program and through other type of programs as well, where I would see in a lot of Slovenian and also other students from smaller countries who really go abroad in order to specialize exactly in what they like, and in that regard the Slovenian students are exceptionally strong and very well trained in terms of knowledge and in terms of practice, right?
If I can maybe add to that, what I also noticed when I went for my postdoc is that with our undergrad knowledge, we can easily compete with their PhD students. So we're really well trained, but I agree with David that there are not all fields available in Slovenian research institutions. And my experience was also there's not enough interdisciplinary teams or teams that cooperate perhaps with the industry. And I couldn't meet with industry in Slovenia because at least our department never had any big grants or big projects with industry, despite the fact that we have, for example, strong pharma industry or strong paints industry. I think this is lacking because Slovenia cannot survive on the RRS money, so the national research money at all. So they're happy with each European or any other external grant they can get, but a lot of times they're forgetting that there's also industrial money available. And when I returned to Slovenia, I was actually choosing between two jobs. One was in Lek, like an industrial job, and one was an assistant position at the University of Ljubljana. And I came with a project, what I would do, what my research field would be, and I was also bringing industrial money. But eventually I was rejected because it was not in the scope of the program group, the research, and they just said this is not what we do here. So
yeah I will second that, as you mentioned, right? And I really think that our undergraduates, for example, right, their training and their background, the course level is so much, and that's not just Slovenia. I would imagine that's also the most of European countries is much more advanced training than the US system, right? Like I'm teaching graduate, like a PhD level as well as undergraduate level organic chemistry in the Illinois in US, and it's a starking difference. Like as Vita mentioned, our undergraduate students, they come with like really at the level of a seasoned, like maybe second year PhD student in the US, right? You really see how good education and background we get, right? Unfortunately, then the research is a little bit different. In the US, the PhD is 5 years, so it's pretty intense experience, while in the Europe is 3 years, and I think this is something that Europe in generally lacks. And I would argue that, and what I've seen, that usually the American PhD scientist is a little bit ultimately stronger, simply because it's, having additional 2 years to do your doctorate, that's almost 50% more time than what you get in Europe, and that makes like significant difference at that level.
I don't know if you two agree, but my observation was that I think in US, even bachelors or undergraduates are more encouraged to do research as compared to undergraduates in Slovenia.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know how it's now back home, but like I remember I have done a lot of undergraduate research, and it was really self-initiated. Maybe you need a bit more self-initiative, as being here in Europe. Well, in the US, it's more like an open kind of a season, right? Like where the professors do kind of advertise undergraduate research more broadly and promote it. In that regard, yes, I would agree with you, right? Yeah. And I think undergraduate research is so crucial because you get like additional experience even before you get your master's or diploma, right? And can really shape your kind of like not just practical intuitions, but also like kind of career paths. Like it's kind of hard to recognize like whether it's something you like to do by simply going to like lab exercises or practicum, right? Because it's sometimes it's just this like a dry technical training, but if you're in the lab and kind of thinking about research, developing your critical thinking and stuff like that, it can be more ultimately then encouraging or empowering that you continue studies further, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I completely agree. What would you think are the biggest challenges that the field of organic chemistry is currently facing? And even a bit further, maybe, how would you envision the future of organic chemistry, or especially total synthesis? As you already mentioned before, now there is a growing interest in using artificial intelligence and machine learning, deep learning, to combine it together with organic chemistry field.
Yeah. I would say like that. I'm not afraid for my future or the future of my discipline, right? Because just seeing how the total synthesis evolved over the decades, right? It's of course every discipline, in order to survive, it has to continuously further evolve and develop, and total synthesis is really going more towards sustainability, right? I think we're past the point where we prove that you can these days make pretty much any molecule you can, and we are now at the stage where we really try to think about how to make molecules that are efficient, how we can make complex molecules that then we can simplify their production to the point that they can enter medicinal chemistry and ultimately have Vita distributing them at the end of the very, very long process, right?
Yeah.
Because that's something that we are still not good at, right? We have a lot of really, let's say, potent compounds that will have an awesome potential to become drugs, but they're too hard to be made. We cannot make them on the scale, we cannot produce them to be industrially relevant, right? They will be too expensive, and that's kind of like where the field of synthesis, also total synthesis and methodology development, is really going towards more like sustainability, towards like efficiency and stuff like that. Vita, you have something to add?
I have a sub question. Are you allowed to use like enzymes or stuff like that? Oh, okay. So that's now part of. Okay.
The chemoenzymatic synthesis is kind of
because that's what I was most interested in protein interactions and how to shovel a product from. My postdoc was actually working on 14 enzymes that work in a row to make a peptidoglycan for the bacterial cell and how to disrupt them. And it's just amazing to see how that machinery works, and it had millennia to develop, and we're still far away even with all the artificial intelligence to catch up, but it's good to hear it's not just pure chemistry, but it's whatever you can get to help, right?
It is becoming, a really a very strong push in organic synthesis, including total synthesis, to start applying as much as, kind of chemoenzymatic steps beyond just classical oxidoreductases, right, or lipases, but like really developing or inverse engineering enzymes to start doing very unique CH hydroxylations and also glycosylations and stuff like that. And the big, of course, the big supporter of that is pharmaceutical industry, right? Some of the really really big pharma companies in the US have now the whole chemoenzymatic departments where they're trying to implement as much as enzymatic steps because they're usually much cheaper and also more environmentally friendly, of course, than using a classical wet organic chemistry. So
and more effective or
more
efficient.
effective, yes. You see, if you would be doing your postdoc now, you could easily go into that
Damn it, I was
direction,
10
right?
years ahead of my time, David. 10 years.
Yeah. And a lot of this push really came from also, Arnold Francis, right? The Nobel Prize for directed evolution, and a lot of students and postdocs who were in her lab were synthetic chemists who got training in enzymology or enzyme engineering, and then went back into the organic chemistry and start applying this type of directed evolution towards synthesis. And we're seeing now huge boom of this area in our discipline, and even our lab is trying to learn let's say at this point the basics of enzymology to kind of really start using this
Good. Are you hiring?
as an important tools. Yeah. Now to go back just to the last part of the question, right? So the influence of machine learning and kind of the computer sciences in chemistry, it's getting really integrated. There are many new directions. We've seen some application in our work, maybe not as much as we would want, and that's simply because the state of the art of that area is still quite basic relative to maybe the challenges we have to deal with. But it's becoming better, right? For example, retrosynthesis is becoming really proficient, right? So if you're a medicinal chemist who doesn't have much training how to make a molecule, computer can these days predict you a very reasonable and successful approach how to make molecules. Maybe not as complex as Mother Nature can make in more advanced form, but more like medicinal chemistry level molecules, which are usually a little bit more topologically simpler. But those type of tools are really good and becoming better and better. The problem is that a lot of that tools, they use kind of established data to then kind of make predictions. And if you remember, I mentioned retrosynthesis involves a lot of imagination and often involves finding kind of new paths or even kind of trying to discover new reactivity within how to build them, how to make a molecules and stuff like that. And I think this is something that at least at this point we don't see yet that type of creativity element present in a retrosynthesis. It can the computers, the machines, they really know thousands of reactions that are established and they know how to put them together. And in that regard, they can be the human brain, but they don't still know how to use that to kind of predict completely new reactivity, make maybe more innovative approaches. For that, I think probably the way how it's going, they're gonna soon be there. But at this point, we still don't see that level of let's say creativity that maybe a chemist could accomplish, at least in context of synthesis.
Do you think that application of artificial intelligence is in any way important for Slovenian research and Slovenian industry or startup space?
I think Vita would be so much more well calibrated because she's in this space to answer this question. I think ultimately, I think given the fact how this is really, impacting every field these days, eventually, yes, right? So I know most American companies are now using, machine learning in predictions of yields and selectivities of the reactions and stuff like that. And I think companies are realizing that if you don't get on board, you're going to be left behind, right? But maybe Vita, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I see in our company as well, because I led a number of IT initiatives, because IT is, again, another field I'm very interested in. I did some computational chemistry back in the day also. And here, for example, in our company, I put together this Power BI dashboard so we can now calculate and see in real time during the day what our sales information is, sales data is, what our stock levels are, when to order what, because of course the use of medicines, if you look at it, is not linear, nor is it exponential. It's not related to weather. It's not related to, discounts that happen in a let's say, grocery shop. Yeah, you cannot really tie it to anything. Of course, if there's a balloon accident like there was a couple of years ago with several casualties or highly endangered patients, you're going to need more of intensive care medicines. Or during COVID, our healthcare system needed more of certain types of medicines that are used in intensive care again, or for infectology departments. But a lot of this you cannot predict. However, you can detect trends if you have a lot of data, if you have, meta-analysis and whatnot. So the IT systems we have in the company are all of the time being improved. AI is coming into our systems as well. For research, I don't know, because I'm not involved that much into R&D, nor industrial, nor academic in Slovenia. But as David said, if you don't get with the times, you get left behind. So it's the same in all sectors.
That's very true, yes. So if we now turn a little bit more into philosophical questions in organic chemistry, what would you comment on how our cultural and societal values influence the kind of research questions are pursued in organic chemistry? Is everything more connected with trying to find the next medicine for an existing disease, or what would you say?
Yeah, I think, like every discipline, right? We are very much connected to the society and in a way, public opinion, right? And that's primarily because, we do basic research. We're, 90% funded by in our case, like federal grants, so taxpayer money, right? So it means that, we need to be very, very mindful. What do we propose? What are we working on? Let's say that, having like a major research direction, which is just based on, your pure curiosity, you cannot do it anymore, right? I mean, older scientists will tell you that, maybe in like, even 60s, 70s, 80s of the previous century, you could do that, right? Like, the science was so well funded that people could really explore curiosity-driven research. Today, in our case, most of our funding comes from, NIH, National Institute of Health. Means that, when we do research related to that, we really have to justify it that it's relevant to the human health. That means that, and that's not a problem because, as Vita mentioned earlier, right, like a small molecule drugs are still the number one, drugs that we make. And biologics are becoming important, right? However, the trend is upwards, but not maybe so upwards that I would be worried about my job, right? So small molecules are here to stay. Now, that means that, we're going to continuously need to find a way how to design new pathways to small molecules, and as I mentioned earlier, how to make them more efficient and stuff like that. And that is in a way the pressure, I would say, our scientific evolutionary pressure that comes really from society, right? And we need to find better ways to justify our research, which ultimately comes from the taxpayers' money, right? So we need to make sure that we're always kind of meaningful, right? That's becoming more and more important.
What I would perhaps add is I was just at the book club that AmCham Slovenia organized yesterday here in Šiška. And it was with the Slovenian doctor David Zupančič that last year published this book about his 2 years during the COVID era at the infectology clinic in Ljubljana. So how it was putting on those scaphanders and everything, how they were able to survive those grueling 24-hour shifts and so on. And what stuck in my mind was that he said what he was most surprised about, that, how to put it best, Slovenian politicians and people who mainly appear in the public, on the television, on the radio, not a lot of them are trained in natural sciences, and they're willing to say, just in order to answer a question, anything just to answer. Whilst we, like chemists, biologists, and so on, who are trained, who work on experiments, who don't write a paper without citing every sentence we took from somewhere, or if it's our own original research needs to be proven by graphs, by charts, by, CHN analysis and much more modern techniques, David, now than that. we're not so willing to say something just to say something. We would say more likely, I don't know, let's figure it out. And that was what I was also really intrigued at the start of the COVID pandemic, because it was hard for those doctors to say, we don't know, this is a new virus. Yeah. But if you have this sort of natural sciences training, if you're a chemist, we're talking about chemistry today, I think you can't just spew facts, or you can't be an influencer and just write stuff on the internet without having a background for it. So this is maybe something we're contributing to our society, that we're based in facts and in research. And if more people took that as something that needs to be behind a statement somebody says, maybe our world would be a better place. We're philosophical.
What would you say that is the role of creativity and intuition? Professor Sarlah, you before mentioned that lots of creativity is needed when you're designing a process either of retrosynthesis or a total synthesis process. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I think, chemistry it really needs a lot of, imagination, and therefore also a lot of creativity, right? I think I personally probably like it, organic chemistry, because it's, you have to draw structures, right? So I like it. I like draw structures much more than write down numbers, right? So that's why I'm chemist maybe. Yeah, it's a very creative science. You need a lot of imagination, not just like when it comes to thought process, right? But also intuition, right? As you mentioned, right? In the lab, we do a lot. I mean, organic synthesis, organic chemistry is experimental science. You have to know how compounds, we call it, how they behave, how to purify them, how to handle different intermediates, right? It's almost like compounds you're working, they have different personalities, you can imagine, and you have to know how to handle those personalities. I would compare organic chemistry to cooking, which people often like to do, right? So it's like there are people who are really awesome cooks, but there are people who really don't know how to cook, and even if they try hard, they won't know how to cook, right? So I think that's the kind of the intuition level, right? It's like you require it, right? But that being said, like there are other maybe other subdisciplines where intuition is maybe not so important, right? So but in organic chemistry, because it's really experimental, it's a lot of understanding your kind of continuously understanding how your compounds are evolving, how to really handle them. It requires that type of intuition, and I think it's a training. You need to have a bit of a talent, and but it's something that can be also reinforced with people who are willing to do that, right? So yeah, it's a combination of intuition and imagination. What do you think, Vita?
Yeah, I would agree with that. It takes a creative person to do that, and to stick with the experiments even when tens of them go wrong or different than you presumed they would go. But as I age, I would say that, because I never thought I had intuition, to be fair, for anything in life. Because some people say, oh, I'm such an intuitive person. I'm not that person. But as I age, I see that intuition, or the way I see it, is that it's agglomeration of your experience and recognition of patterns. Because David, you and I, we were in the lab, and you are still in the lab since you were probably 12 or something, 14, yeah? So you've handled the round bottom flask and crystallization of products millions times probably. So you know where to scratch for the crystallization to occur. It's
acquired skill. It's also acquired skill.
It's
right?
A lot of it, I believe, is acquired.
Yeah. But you still need to kind of know how to recognize this. And
Sure. So we're not just, it's not working. It's the case of Alexander Fleming when discovering penicillin. He could have said, oh, I left this, whatever it was, petri dish at the open window. It grew something, but in the circle it didn't grow something, whatever. I'm going to throw it away. No, he looked at it and he asked, why is there a circle where there's nothing around that? And then, that leads to the discovery, right? And maybe I'm not that good at that.
I think you are.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. I still remember you're already, very good back in the day. So, I mean, you just got better, right? You're just getting better. So I'm pretty sure you're good.
So you both were you kind of drew comparison between cooking and performing organic synthesis. So when I was doing some research, and also I am myself quite interested in robotized synthesis, because I feel like personally that would save a lot of time, because I know that organic chemistry is a lot of trial and error. Do you think that with robotizing organic synthesis, we would lose a lot of creativity, or would that be helpful?
Again, right? So I'm familiar with these concepts quite a bit, right? And if they could help us making our job easier, I would start adopting them immediately, right? And the challenge at this point is that they're still not as developed to be applied, at least in our line of research. And maybe one day they will be. And if you can, let's say, automate the synthesis, right? Meaning that you don't need maybe so many, students or scientists to deal with the compounds, to purify them, set up reactions and all that stuff. I think that would be in the long term nice, because we could all spend more time reading papers and thinking about science than actually spending hours failing our experiments in the hood, right? So I would be completely for that. But as I mentioned earlier, right, it's like, you can automate synthesis for like a very specific subset of compounds. Let's say peptides, right? You can take amino acids and then you can grow amino acid with a synthesizer, and you can it's kind of a modular. You can take different amino acid building blocks and you can grow them into peptides and even proteins these days, right?
Or PCR for gene,
yeah, or you can synthesize genes and stuff like that. But this is so specific. The building blocks are virtually the same in terms of the connectivity, and you're doing this like, in
linear addition.
in a linear sense, right? And that's very prompt automation because it's iterative, very similar. But when you look at, these complex molecules Mother Nature produced and we have to work on it, I mean, every molecule is so unique. Every step is so unique. There is no generalization. And the problem is when you don't have generalization and you have this huge variety and diversity, it's really hard to automate those things because you're talking about so many different, factors. Maybe you can start optimizing and doing machine learning with individual steps, and we're getting better and better and we're doing that. But like to kind of like go from zero to like this complex molecule, right? Like, and using, completely robotics or automation, I just don't see it, at least not yet. But I can imagine that, who knows where we're going to be in like 20 years from today, right? I mean, given the how fast we're evolving, and maybe one day. The other thing is, I feel like we have to be a bit careful. I think, often I think also media maybe, or other organizations or people often overreact a little bit, and I won't say over promote, but take things out of the context. Let's say there's a paper on automation, and then there might be some journal saying, like a newspaper saying, public newspaper saying, oh, now we can make any molecule.
The future of chemistry, yes.
Then people feel like, oh, this is now a solved problem, which is so far away, and it just creates maybe a little bit of this, misinformation ultimately, right? So I think there is a huge push in this area, but I also think there is maybe a little bit the propaganda is not really maybe as realistic as it might seem, especially if you're on the other side. And one day for sure, but I think we're still, at least in my opinion, quite far from that point, right? But it's definitely interesting concepts, right? It would be nice if you could have a robot that could do everything possible what synthetic chemists we do, right? And again, I would be down for it. It would save us a lot of failure, and we can really then focus more on like what else we can do, and more on the we can spend more time being creative ultimately, right? Yeah.
Maybe on my side, I think that automation and robotization has a place in manufacturing pharmaceutical industry, where there are already quite a few, robots and autonomous systems in place, but there's always a human present. There's always a human who needs to confirm the results, sign off the paperwork that ultimately leads to authorization of a pharmaceutical product. So I also think we're quite far here for, an automated system to go from A to Z and make everything in one batch. It's not going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah, and that's in industrial size, that's a little bit different, because there you already have an established, validated process, and it's really you're doing kind of continuous manufacturing, right? Or maybe inline manufacturing, or how they call it, right? So those you can automate much more streamlined, because you're not changing the process.
Well,
right?
you are a bit, scale up is very tricky in pharma industry.
I know, but once you optimize it, then if you optimize it in like a flow, you can make it. A lot of companies are trying to automate, because then you're not once you optimize a specific set of reactions that you don't change, then you can actually have the power of automate them, right? Because they're like you kind of know what they are. They're predictable. But if you do R&D and you don't know the outcome, and you have many reactions, then that automation becomes really challenging, because you're continuously have to look how to advance it, right? And it's more that like a research part, it's becoming much more harder, because you start generating a lot of data, but not necessarily can be
good data.
It could be meaningful, right? Yeah, right. So yeah, they're like, I think they're like, they're different views, of course. I'm sure if there will be a person here who's developing automated synthesis, we would have like maybe a heated argument now, right? But then again, I'm I as I said, I would be happy to be using tools that could enable our research, right? Anytime.
How would you say that organic chemistry intersects with larger debates about sustainability and environment, and what kind of responsibility do chemists have to consider of the broader implications of their work, and also pharma industry in this case?
Yeah, in terms of synthesis, it's becoming, as I mentioned, sustainability is a huge push. We start seeing, almost certain really toxic chemicals, right? Like, let's say mercury, right? Which everybody knows is very toxic, right? I think these days nobody would support you doing research in organomercury with organomercury compounds, right? So, which again, maybe 50 years ago this was not a problem, right? But mercury is a really extreme example. But we see more and more chemicals, because every day we know more about toxicology of the compounds and stuff like that, and we see more and more chemicals being put on like this, I would say maybe undesired list. But the problem becomes that a lot of those chemicals are really essential in our work. So we have to continuously kind of evolve our chemistry, how to do reactions, what chemicals we can use. Process that maybe 5 years ago was completely fine suddenly becomes really challenging, because suddenly one of the chemicals was found to be like quite toxic, and you cannot use it anymore, and you have to completely find alternatives and stuff like that. So there is a lot of there is a big push in terms of green chemistry, sustainable chemistry, and of course organic chemistry at the center of it, because we make so many molecules that are not just pharmaceuticals. They're like polymers, right? Organic materials from paint research. Organic chemistry is everywhere, right? So it really affects us.
Yeah, what I would perhaps add here is that there's also the other side of the ESG, is that by using these starting materials, you're depleting the world's chemicals that are found in nature, or perhaps a lot of organic chemistry starting blocks are made from fossil fuels. This is time consuming, energy consuming, polluting industry in a way. I always remember when still at the University of Ljubljana, we dragged up and down from this container in front of the faculty these 2.5 liter bottles of God knows what, I forgot already. And then you had to take them, this waste bottles filled with God knows what again, but many more different compounds mixed in, back down again. And they were destroyed somewhere out of your reach, but that's waste, and that's toxic waste. Yeah. So how to minimize that? I think with the push that the European Union recently pushed through the banks, and banks won't fund any companies, not only pharmaceutical companies, but companies in general, or will give far worse conditions for funding or for
loans.
For loans, yeah, for companies, if they don't have a very clear ESG agenda, measured carbon footprint, measures in place how to lower it, and so on and so forth. It's not just chemistry. We're all taking much more out of the planet than there is in the planet for the size of the population and for the, let's say, luxuries we afford ourselves. And it's no different in chemistry or in the pharma industry. So yeah, see the total picture, do the experiment if you need to do it. If you can do it some other way or some more green way, sure, let's try and do it. But sometimes there's no other way than the dirty way.
Yeah. There is a huge push for promotion of green chemistry, and of course, we see to some extent, but this is much bigger in industry, including pharmaceutical industry, where they really have to start justifying how much of waste they produce, how much of toxic and carbon footprint ultimately, right? And this is now becoming all kind of standardized. There are special metrics for it, right? Yeah, again, this is something. It's really becoming more and more prevalent in the last couple of years, and given the trend, it will become much more important. Right?
And how can organic chemistry shed a bit of light on some larger questions, such as the origins of life and the evolution of living systems, and maybe the nature of matter and the universe in more general sense?
Yeah, so it's a very philosophical question, right? And it's philosophical because of course, the life really started from more organic molecules that ultimately start making organic polymers, right? Proteins, DNA, and stuff like that. But the ultimate question is that we don't have any evidence, right? There is no such thing as chemical archaeology, right? Because organic molecules are unstable; they decompose in a matter of days, years, right? We don't have any chemical evidence. So what people are saying that we need to rediscover life in a way, right? And there's a fairly huge area of research who is doing that, which is trying to take those initial building blocks, thinking about how they were created, the DNA bases, and how they were, assembled together. But all that again is pure philosophical. Even if you arrive to that, let's say DNA at the end of the day, you cannot prove this is really the way how the life started, because that evidence is gone, right? In terms of the universe, we have the whole area called like astrochemistry, as you know, right? And that one, it's not my expertise, but part of it is also organic chemistry, like looking for basic amino acid building blocks, right? And they found those, of course, in steroids at different planets. They even found like terpenes, like steroids and stuff like that. So it's interesting how that will be shaped and how we're gonna try to think about how this was ultimately created somewhere else as well, which I think people are kind of getting an idea on that, right? But it's all quite philosophical, right? Because who knows if there's a single answer that can really, how the life was created, right? And who knows if that answer is actually the right answer.
Yeah, I would maybe answer this question with an anecdote from the first year of my studies in biochemistry, when we were presented with the fact how high is the error rate of DNA polymerase, and then the reverse transcriptase that kind of corrects the errors of DNA polymerase. And even that rate of this corrector enzyme is very high. So at the end of that lecture, I left the lecture theater literally shaking, because statistically I couldn't explain to myself how is it possible that I am alive and functioning properly. And that really kind of shakes you to the core. That, we're studying these proteins, amino acids, God knows what. And that's why I was always so dragged back into these biosystems, into biochemistry, medicinal chemistry, structural biology, because I'm fascinated with what even small single-celled organisms can do. And it's all on the basis of really millennia of R&D, not in industry, not in academia, but let's say within the cells themselves. So they found a way to operate in a most optimal way, to present themselves in the most optimal shape to do the job they're there to do, and it's amazing.
So now we are slowly approaching the end of our conversation. What advice would you have for young scientists who are just starting out in their careers and who may be facing some uncertainty and lots of competition in the current research landscape, or maybe someone who is really aspiring to be a managing director at a pharmaceutical company?
Okay, Vita, you want to go first?
I can go first, because if I gave advice to my younger self when I was, I'd say 18, I would just say, go for it, have more guts. And I already had quite a lot of guts, especially for a woman, I would say. But I would want myself to have even more guts to go and follow what interests me. Maybe I was too limited with where these things are, geography, finance, whatever. I think David is great proof that if you want to achieve the thing, you have to go for it, right? But on the other hand, if you don't end up doing what you thought you're going to do, because I thought I'm going to be a university professor since I was in elementary school. I had a poster of Einstein in my bedroom. I always thought I'm going to end up somewhere in Oxford or Cambridge, and I didn't. It's fine. You're going to survive, and you're going to find something else you're interested in and really good at, actually. So I always imagine this career path as a tree. You start at the trunk or at the trunk of the tree. You climb up, elementary school, high school, university. You think you know where you're going, and there's all sorts of branches and leaves, and you end up going on one branch and jumping on the other and on the third. There are many opportunities. Just choose the one that seems most appropriate for you at the time you're in, and don't regret anything looking backwards. Yeah. So from where you are, just look where you can go next. That's my short suggestion or advice, if you will.
Yeah. So I will first confirm that, ever since, now, 15 years ago, since I know Vita, she always had a lot of guts. I confirm that, yes. She was always very brave, right? And she was always going for what she wanted. And I would totally agree with that. That would be my advice as well. I think what got me maybe, where I am today is because I did not wait on the opportunity to come. You need to kind of seize the opportunity, right? Like I remember
create
even, right? I was undergraduate. I was in my second year of undergraduate studies, and I suddenly realized that I want to do, let's say, total synthesis for my PhD. There was no this kind of a study nearby in Ljubljana, or actually nearby in Europe. So I sent an email to one of the greatest experts whose book I read, and turns out that person ultimately took me for an internship, become a PhD advisor, right? And often you see the challenge, right? You have these exceptionally capable people, but they just think that because there's, they have a perfect grade and everything, things will just fall in their hands. It's not going to happen. You really have to go and create those opportunities. And what I like to advice to my own students, I have a group of I don't know, currently maybe 15 doctorants, right? I always tell them, you always need to project yourself to the next level, right? And that projection should always be like looking up. Where do you want to be in a couple of years? And knowing that projections, you need to work to achieve it, right? Because you need to have kind of a vision, or maybe a secret dream for yourself, like ambition that, even if you're not willing to share it, if you're embarrassed, at least you have to like have it and project yourself there and continuously think about how you're going to get there, because that's going to really kind of drive you to the next level. And don't expect that's going to just fall into your hands, right? So I think combinations of all that is ultimately, what I would advise to young people. Like, once you know what your passion is, you need to start dreaming, but then you have to start, dreams don't work if you don't, right? So you really have to start doing something towards that, right? Yeah.
I think David and I are both about to, or have just turned 40, and we're full of wisdom. So just wait for another 20 years, will be even,
Yeah. Who knows what the advice will be then? Let's see. Yeah.
Maybe completely contra.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your fantastic advice, and thank you all for joining us today in this podcast. And to our audience, we hope you enjoyed this podcast episode.